I'm worried that my hometown doesn't exist, that I was born in Sunset Bay, Florida, or at least I thought I was born there. I thought I was raised there, spent 17 and a half years of my life there, went to school there, had my first kiss there, and almost lost my virginity there, but now I can't even be sure. You see, as far as the world seems to be concerned, there is no such place as Sunset Bay, Florida, and there never was. Unfortunately, this story began with Hurricane Milton. As we're all well aware by now, Milton was utterly devastating for many fellow Floridians this month, and let me just say that my heart goes out to them all, well and truly. Luckily for me, though, I'd moved out of Florida with my family in 1995, just a few months before I turned 18, and I now reside in British Columbia here in Canada. Understandably, though, when I heard that Milton made landfall in Florida, I was concerned for my hometown. I'd never been incredibly attached to Sunset Bay, and frankly, it had been years since I'd even thought of the place. I have 2 sons and a wife, so there are more important things in my life than reminiscing about my formative years down south. However, when I learned Milton had made a pass around near Big Cypress down by Ochope, that got my blood pumping something fierce. You see, Sunset Bay is, or was, or maybe never was, only a handful of miles away. Naturally, I hopped on my computer when I got the chance and did some searching. I looked up Hurricane Milton's Sunset Bay. At first, I was relieved to find I'd come up with 0 results. I figured that meant there hadn't been anything newsworthy there, which could have been good news in and of itself. But I was soon struck by the realization that I wasn't seeing any news about Sunset Bay because the search engine had taken the liberty of assuming I was asking about Sunset Beach down on Treasure Island. So I tried rephrasing Hurricane Milton, Sunset Bay, Florida, Ochope, but nothing. All I got was a handful of irrelevant pages on Sunset Beach, Siesta Key, and even Tampa. I was hit each time with a prompt asking me something like, "Did you mean Hurricane Milton, Sunset Beach?" I found myself like a real old man, sitting there while verbally beginning to chew out the computer. No, I would say, not Sunset Beach, Sunset Bay. I found myself getting so fed up with what I took to be some sort of Abbott and Costello-style mix-up that I ended up trying to soothe my seething self by simply typing in Sunset Bay with the hope that it'd get me somewhere. But to my shock and severe annoyance, I found myself yet again redirected to Sunset Beach. For context, Sunset Beach is a whole 5 or so hours from where Sunset Bay should be. They are not the same place in any sense of the word. I found myself seething even further, typing in Sunset Bay into my search bar with every sort of permutation I could think of. Sunset Bay, Florida, Sunset Bay, Florida, Sunset Bay, United States, Sunset Bay, Ochobe, Florida, United States, but never got a single result. By then, I was livid, but I was also determined to beat the computer, as dumb as that sounds, to get the results I was looking for. Call me stupid, call me stubborn, call the endeavor pointless. I simply wanted it to work once. But it never worked, not even once. Not even a hint of acknowledgement that Sunset Bay ever existed. Not even Google Maps would acknowledge its existence. Believe me, I tried. Eventually, it got to the point where I figured that the only way to get this damn thing working would be to stop looking up Sunset Bay itself, and instead look up some specific place in Sunset Bay that may have some sort of website, maybe online reviews, maybe a blog post, something, anything. So I took a pause, rolled back from the desk, furrowed my brow, and got to thinking. I tried to think of where the most significant internet-worthy place from back home might be, but the moment the neurons began firing off in my mind, I was struck with a pain so intense I can hardly even describe it. I'd imagine it felt like how it would feel if your skull was cleaved apart with an axe, and then boiling pitch was poured into the gaping wound. I screamed my lungs out, grabbed my head with both hands, and came careening down onto the floor, gasping and panting like a drowning man. The world felt like it was going out of focus, but my ear on the ground, I could hear the dull footsteps of my eldest son running into the room, followed surely by my wife, as they hoisted me onto my feet as best they could. They asked me what was wrong and why I had shouted, and I could only respond by telling them it was probably nothing, just a bad headache. Even so, my wife, who has some sort of sick addiction to these medical channels on YouTube, made me promise to see a doctor because she told me there was something called thunderclap headaches, and they could be a sign of something really dangerous. Before you ask, no, I haven't gone yet, but I'm booked in for next week with my GP. To my relief, it seemed as though as soon as the subject was changed and my mind drifted back from the vague memories of my hometown, I felt good as new again, as though nothing had even happened. I gave my family reassurances as best as I could, gave my wife a quick kiss and my son a hug, and placed myself firmly back down in my chair. I was back in the saddle, and I hadn't been bested yet. Piece of shit, I murmured as I slapped the keyboard, looking up to see my wife, hand outstretched with some Tylenol for me, to whom I quickly clarified that the computer was the piece of shit, not her. She gave me a quick, understanding chuckle, and left, leaving me alone once again with my new arch-nemesis, the computer. However, it only took me a few more failed searches to get utterly fed up, and to hell with it. Later I was storming out of the room, throwing in the metaphorical towel. I had better things to do with my time, or so I thought, because, that night, as I lay in bed, I found myself grumbling, huffing and puffing to myself like a candy-deprived child about the whole debacle. However, the more I ran over the whole situation in my mind, the more my frustration began to morph into unease, and the more thoughts like, why the hell couldn't I find anything about Sunset Bay, to why couldn't I find anything about Sunset Bay? Surely it's an abnormal occurrence for a town with a public school, thousands of residents, and several notable businesses to simply disappear not just from the map, but from the veritable neo-library of Alexandria that is the internet, right? I couldn't take it anymore. My annoyance had morphed into an overwhelming sense of dread, and I found myself in desperate need of some assurance that this was all some huge mistake. So I went digging, not through the computer this time, but through an old wicker cabinet by the edge of the bed full of keepsakes and mementos. After a few moments of searching, I found what I was looking for. My middle school yearbook from Sunset Bay Public School, an incredibly creative name. Trust me, I know. To not wake my wife, I slipped away with the book back into my office, cracked it open across the desk like some sort of ancient scroll, and found my dread quickly turning to terror. There I was, my page was bookmarked, and to my right should have been Brock Tanner. But I found my greasy, pimple-pocked face next to a pale, gray square, and below, where the name should have been, was an amorphous black smudge like the ink had been nearly rubbed out with a cloth. A misprint, maybe? I thought so. But I became less and less certain the more laminated pages I turned, finding myself faced with an ocean of gray squares and black smudges, swirling into a blobby mess like a horrifying Rorschach test occasionally broken up by a calm, unbothered young face on whom the horror of this whole ordeal was understandably lost. Eyes glued to the page, I found myself fumbling for the landline, dialing the school's phone number as if from muscle memory from all those days playing hooky as a kid. It never even crossed my mind that even if this was all some huge misunderstanding, they'd certainly be closed in the dead of night. But the phone rang. It rang, and then it rang again, but a little softer and softer still. The quivering sounds of the line grew faint and distant, quieter still, as though the phone were being dropped down a bottomless pit, falling away until it was entirely indistinct. I nearly screamed in surprise when breaking up the dead silence, a robotic voice boomed, crackling and monotone, telling me the call was unable to be completed as dialed, before booting me out, leaving me right back where I started, eyes wild, panting in distress, fists clenched on the arms of my chair. Mackenzie, I stammered to myself, in a fervor now, glancing down at the face of Mackenzie Connors, one of the few remaining human buoys in the ocean of nothingness which glared back at me from the page, that I went right to the computer, booted it up, and typed in Mackenzie Connors, Sunset Bay, Florida, and to my surprise and delighted relief, I was able to find what seemed to be her LinkedIn page which, while having no visible mention of Sunset Bay, did mention that she was from Florida, and she looked to be about the right build and age to be her. Once again, I failed to consider that it was the middle of the night, and may very well be wherever Mackenzie was now, but I needed this. I needed to hear someone's voice, someone from back home. I didn't even have an excuse for calling. The best I could think of was maybe something about the oddity of the yearbook, but the line connected before I could think of anything better. Hudson Tech Solutions, Mackenzie speaking. How may I help you? Hey, Mackenzie? I asked, the awkwardness of this whole situation beginning to dawn on me. Yes? How may I help you, sir? I apologize if I got the wrong person here, but did you happen to go to school in Sunset Bay, Florida? Excuse me? Did I dash? I heard her begin before my ears were utterly assaulted by a horrifying, high-pitched scream from the phone speaker. So shrill and intense I worried it would tear the thing to bits, along with the grating sound of shattering glass. Mackenzie? I try to remain calm, my head beginning to throb through the dullness of the painkillers. Mackenzie, are you okay? No reply. I sat wide-eyed in horror, as the line seemed to briefly go dead before I could hear the sound of quiet, murmuring voices and approaching footsteps as I assume people began to barge into her room. Hey, Mackenzie, are you all right? One voice asked. Did someone scream? Another timidly inquired. Shit, she's on the ground. She's on the ground. A woman shrieked. Let go of the phone. Let go of them, another implored feverishly before the line went dead, leaving me in stunned silence with the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I was mortified. I couldn't do anything but set the phone down on the table, not even the receiver, and shuffle, milky-eyed back to the bedroom, whereupon I slid under the covers and shuffled up to my wife, as though by wrapping my arms around her I was trying to confirm to myself that I did exist and things did make sense. I wish I had more to tell you, but as of now, this is where I'm at. I sincerely hope someone can help me here because I have not for the life of me been able to find any external references to my hometown. And every time I try and think real hard about it, it feels like my head is going to implode or explode or shatter into a million pieces. Can someone please help me?